So I am very pleased to welcome for this third session Susanna Guyenes from the Institution of Chemical Engineer Safety Center. We will have also the pleasure to welcome Per Toilings from the Dutch Tank Storage Association. So thank you for joining. And I would like to have also Paul Logan, who was with us this morning in the previous session focusing on policy. So here we have the three speakers for our session this afternoon, which will look at the industry perspective, as I said, and especially what are the drivers for research in the industry, and how are the priority defined for an industry perspective. So I would like that we start right off. We are already 5 minutes late, but I think it's not a big issue. I would like to start very quickly with Susanna. She will speak about applied safety research by industry from the perspective of your institute. And so you have 20 minutes, and I will try to keep the time so that we have enough time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Most of you know me quite for a long time. My name is Susanna Guyenes, and I used to work for the National Directorate of Disaster Management in Hungary, and I spent 8 years within the Joint Research Center of the European Commission, working with Marine at the Major Accident Hazard Bureau. Recently, I've joined the IChemE Safety Center, which is a very, very great experience, I have to say, and it is not as different as you might think than the work that I have actually done within the Joint Research Center, just a little bit of other perspective. I give you an overview about our activities. So first about the IChemE. The IChemE is the whole family, the Institution of Chemical Engineers, and it is a not-for-profit organization based on membership. The difference between the IChemE and the IChemE Safety Center is that the IChemE is based on individual membership. Meanwhile, the IChemE Safety Center is based on organizational membership. We have within the IChemE over 40,000 members across many industrial sectors, and this is quite a colorful association, I have to say, coming from energy, engineering, design, construction, chemicals, and pharmaceuticals, and with a long history. Actually, IChemE is based in different countries, 100 countries we have members all over the world, and offices in Australia, the UK, Malaysia, Singapore, and New Zealand. And there are also members in other countries, in Europe, Ireland, the United States, and so on. So that was the IChemE. And within the IChemE, we operate as the IChemE Safety Center, and it is a multi-company and subscription-based industry-led consortium with different membership categories within. We have a membership for operating companies, so that those are the industrial sites. Either you know them as COMA or Seveso facilities or other types of industries that may not be covered by these, by the directive or by those regulation, but they treat, handle, produce dangerous substances. Our main objective is to share information about process safety and especially analyzing and developing the knowledge about process safety. This is a really core issue for us. And what is our direction towards so-called research activities is based on the decision of the board. The board is the board members are coming from operating companies that are members of the Safety Center. They can tell us immediately what are the hot topics, what are the core issues that they need further guidance, and so that they shape the future of our interest towards producing guidelines documents that I will present you later. And we actually also bring together IChemI's long history in process safety. Why is it necessary to have such a safety center? You have seen from the other presentations that we still have high consequence, low likelihood major accidents occurring still up to today, basically, and with resulting in a huge loss either in number of fatalities or damage to assets and so on, economical loss. And it is not restricted to one industrial type. So it's not only petrochemical, it's not only the chemical or warehouses, it's all over the world, all different industries. And that is interesting and important to memorize, that we should not forget about these events. This is just one slide that shows our members from industry. We have, as I mentioned, operating companies as members, and as well as we have industry partners. Those are the consultancy firms or insurance companies and so on, the expert companies all over the world. Now our intention is to spread our activities also in Europe and the UK and the Middle East. But we are unique as well because we have also members from universities, and I'm very glad to see that Valerio Cozzani professor is around, and Bologna University is one of our members, so that we create a bridge in between industry, industrial expert groups, the academia, so that we have many universities, and we would like to open our activities and share our knowledge with the regulators, so that universities are actually fall into the category like regulators that are supporting partners, and which means that it is all for free, so that everybody can join us from regulators and from universities, and in comparison they get many benefits. And as I mentioned, why we are different, because we bring together all industries. So it's not only chemical, not only energy, but also nuclear we try to get into. And we seek to work in areas that others may not cover. So this is where we try to shape and develop further knowledge on process safety. But the core issue is to give the guidance to the industries immediately. So whenever they need something, they need help, then they need to get access immediately to those documents, to those easily accessible, even short, practical guidance documents. So we don't tend to actually replace any of these other organizations' work, because they do a really good job within their territory and within their interest. So we are not going to publish standards or books at all. That we are focusing on practical guidances. The IChemI Safety Center is working around a framework. The framework was established by the operating companies that are members to the Safety Center. The 6 elements, actually, that you can see here are systems and procedures, engineering and design, assurance, knowledge and competence, human factors and culture, are actually not replacing any safety management system. It's not intended to be one, but this is, we believe, and our members believe, that around the leadership of all of these 6 elements or 6 pillars, that we can cover process safety. And based on these elements that were identified by the members, we published 2 guidance documents and take these 6 pillars as the basic. And around these 6 pillars, there was one guidance. The first one is on process safety competency model, which actually discusses different roles within an organization, within any kind of establishment. And for these different roles, associates different competencies. For example, if you know that very well, that the competency required from a control room operator is different from what competency level is required from a management or the CEO. And those competencies are identified based on a metrics. And the other guidance document tackles the so-called process safety metrics, lead process safety metrics, or you may call them as key performance or safety performance indicators. This is just a different name, but it actually covers the same elements. That was both documents actually were produced by our member companies because we established different technical working groups, and they worked out through real-life examples. And they then took the guidance document and they benchmarked. So it's not only a publication, it's a real-life use document. I know, for instance, 3 companies at least from our members, 2 from Australia and 1 from the United States, that they apply the safety metrics document on a daily basis. So they actually practice what's written in there. Now the work must be continued on that, because even though around the 6 elements, we identified 21 safety metrics, leading safety metrics, we have to identify further information about them, how you actually measure these metrics. And this is now a working group activity that is ongoing. The good news is that if any of you or your industry are interested in those documents, they are free to download. That is our purpose, to share the knowledge and the information about these information. Now, this is a new type of learning. Because we will be talking about lessons learned in the next session, I'd like to, and also Maureen mentioned former hour lessons learned bulletin. Just chuckle. The ICAMI Safety Center has developed a new way of learning from case studies, because as you may know, that you take an accident analysis report and you know what already happened, so that you have a hindsight bias, so that you know that, the operator did this or did that, and why on earth he would do that, and why would he didn't have, for instance, permit to work in the system. And then you already have your judgment, your preliminary thoughts about what's going on, what's happening. But now with these case studies, these are interactive, which means that once you start looking at them and the story goes on, you have to stop and make decisions on behalf of the operator, as if you were the operator or the control room operator or whoever it is that defined by the case study. And then based on the decision, you go further. And then in the end, it will turn out whether you end up in the same accident or not. And last year I ran many of these case studies in Bahrain, and mostly for Saudi Aramco engineers, young engineers, and they were really eager to learn, and they had actually a huge debate on the decisions. So you can imagine it's not that straightforward, and it's quite simple how they are presented. And they tackle different topics, such as permit to work or governance. For instance, the coal mine is not about coal mine. So if you don't run a coal mine activity, it doesn't matter, because you still can learn from the decisions and safety culture that is related. Lift off is it's a space shuttle accident, but actually it's about decisions and coordination, and so on. And the next one will be coming soon. It's actually on emergency response and some nuclear aspects. In Australia, it was important to to develop a new chapter in the occupational health and safety body of knowledge guidance document, because apparently there were confusion about the occupational health and safety experts. They didn't want to intervene with process safety within an industrial facility, and so that they needed some additional information and guidance how to work all together with process safety engineers in the same topic. But then we were talking about the future, and our future is really depending on how we can adapt, and I think that this forum is really a good event to tackle that we are coming closer together from safety, from security, and we have the same approach and the same goal to make everything more secure and more safe. And that was a guidance. It's basically a publication that was prepared altogether with the Mary Kay O'Connor Process Safety Center, and it defines different challenges for different stakeholders. It's exactly for different types of stakeholders, so regulators, what are the challenges in process safety for regulators, what are the challenges for industry, for university, and for society, because we shouldn't forget about our society, that they know more than we would expect about process safety. And then it brings all together these. Of course, this document is also free to download. One thing that I forgot to mention is that the case studies can be purchased. So it's not for free, but you can see if you join the ICAMI Safety Center as regulator, it is for free, all of them, and all the future publications as well. And you can use it for your own purposes, for training your inspectors, or just learn from these case studies. And then as I mentioned, we will be continuing on the competency model that is going to be released this month. We are working on the metrics document more thoroughly, and there is a great, I think, great success that we engaged with universities, because apparently there are expectations from industry towards universities and towards young engineers. So whenever they come and join any kind of industrial sector, they don't know as much as they were expected by the industry, which means that they should know more about different procedures, how to write operating procedures, or what is a permit to work, management of change procedure. And that's why there was this publication about how to basically do safe laboratory experiments using those operating procedures that are in place in the industry. And that's how they can learn. Now we are going to benchmark the document, because we need to test what is written is really useful in real life. And we already have universities that actually applied to this benchmarking exercise. And again, Professor Valerio Cozzani also volunteered. So hopefully we will see at the Loss Prevention 2019 conference the outcome of the benchmarking. Thank you. And I mentioned already these. And if you like the activity of the ICAMI Safety Center, just please feel free to share within your community, within your industries, in your country. It's, I think, and I believe personally that the more we share, the more we know, and the more we learn, actually. And we should learn from each other, and that's why we like that there are so many organizations that actually do the research, and their goal is to improve process safety and security as well. But I didn't mention, but actually the Safety Center does not focus on security, because we believe that there are so many challenges still within process safety. So that, and we have the expertise in that field, so that we have to stick to that. And all the experts that are experts in security, they should do their job. However, we should not work in silos, as you already mentioned it, just to find the balance. And you can just contact me or visit our website. And so I'm very happy to answer to your questions once we arrive to the question and answer part. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for the very informative presentation about all the work. And it's amazing to see how much knowledge is available on the website. So I'm very happy to hear that. Our next speaker is coming from industry. So as I said, from the Dutch Tank Storage Association called VOTOB, and it's Pierre Toilings. So you will let us know about how it is implemented, security is implemented, and some tools also you plan to present.
Yeah. Thank you, and it's especially, I'm sorry, it's especially safety. We have some security aspects in it, but it's mainly safety. And I want to immediately start by saying that this, what we have done in the Netherlands, is all about sharing of information, being fully transparent. So that's the way I think we got a lot further than we were a couple of years ago. Okay. I wanted to start with, and now for something completely different, because as I came in this morning, I got a bit nervous about all the researchers, doctors, engineers in the room, and I'm just a simple guy working for an association in Holland. My name is Pierre Toilings, as said, Dutch Tank Storage Association, and I wanted to tell you something more about how the Dutch storage terminals try constantly to improve their safety, and not only by measuring it, but foremostly by sharing the information we have to improve the overall standard, but helping each other as well to improve individual standards. Let me see, techniques. First, a bit, I'll be short, about my members. We have about 18, 19 companies, member companies, which all store chemicals, oil products, biocomponents, but also edible oils. They have about 28, 29 terminals in the Netherlands, which are mostly based in the harbor regions, which probably you all know, Rotterdam is one of the most important of. But we also have terminals in the south, in Zeeland, in Amsterdam, and even one up north in Groningen, near the German border. Again, we're the biggest tank storage community, so to say, in Europe. We have more than 25 million cubic meters. A bit about turnovers, investments, and that's important. All the ships we see lay by every year, all the rail cars leaving every year, the millions of cubic meters via piping leaving and coming in every year. So it's a lot of not only storage but handling of product as well. And I'm going to be even shorter on that. In 2012, we had one of our members come to a complete shutdown. A big member, and it came to a shutdown after a range of quite serious incidents. No people got hurt, but we had some serious emissions, for example, and there were serious questions about if this terminal was still able to operate. And sometimes you see that companies say, okay, we'll take economic advantage, maybe, so to say. But in this case, the members of the association said this is not good for the whole sector. They got together and had a whole day of discussions, and looked each other in the eye and said, in the end, we're competitors, but we don't want to be competitors on safety matters. So what they said is, are we certain that we're not as unsafe as our fellow member right here at the table? And can we prove that? how can we come to this conclusion? So they started by talking to each other and to some consultants, and we came up by developing an own audit, and not just an audit by ticking boxes, but a decent audit I'm going to tell you a bit more about now. We call it a safety maturity tool. We started out by calling it a self-assessment tool, but immediately people were telling us, well, this is, as we call it in Holland, the butcher inspecting or checking his own meat. I don't know if that's a proper English word, but I think you understand. So we immediately started, after a couple of months, started calling it a safety maturity tool, because on the one hand, we have external consultants who help us with the audit, so we don't do it ourselves. And the maturity is about growing, about learning, about being transparent, about raising the bar every time, every year. This is just now we've done this audit for the fifth time, the fifth year. So we have a little bit of a celebration this year. Again, I'm going to tell you a bit more about this. We took every piece of regulation, law, good practice, best practice we could find about the industry, and put that. I didn't do it, consultant did it, very complicated job, put it into one big tool, one big box. We are focusing on three aspects: hardware, birds, tanks, piping, etc. We're focusing on software, management systems, etc. But last but not least, mindware. We're focusing on mindware as well. And if you're now asking, what did you put into the box to measure the mindware, to measure the heads of people? We used a couple of things, like the Hearts and Minds system. I think it's developed by Shell. TNO is a company I saw earlier this morning, which does a lot of research in the Netherlands, and they developed some extra tools, some extra questions, quite simple, to add to already existing manners to measure the heads, the culture of people. So we put that all together in one big box, and we said you want a score at the end. It's not about scoring. I immediately want to say, but you need a score as a starting point. So we said you could come from a 1, which says you better close down the whole terminal. You're not interested to anything related to safety at all. To reflective, which would be doing things even better than law is asking you, government is asking you to do. This is not a 1, A2, or A3. It's like a rainbow. Although my daughter will immediately say, you don't have all the colors of the rainbow, but you can score a 2.7 or a 4.2, so it's a range you can get into. To get a bit more into the kind of questions you would have. I'm not going into the details, but these are groups of questions. You know, it's when it comes to mindware, it's going about safety meetings. Do you have safety meetings? How often? What do you do? How do you learn? How do you talk about incidents? How do you deal with risks? Training, education, etc. And then the interesting part at the end for mindware results would be that you would have your actual score. This is again not on the detail, but on some main groups. You could see. You could compare, you can see where you score good, where you have some work to be done, etc. You can compare it to the different former years as well. Software, safety policies, how's your management of change, how do you monitor, how do you report incidents, etc. And for that as well, every terminal has its own, and it's a very thick booklet of all individual scores per different subject of your terminal. But again, this is on some main subjects. Hardware, because it's not. I stated earlier, it's not about ticking boxes. The actual consultant will come, take his hammer and his poke, and will first ask you the questions. We'll want to see the permits. We'll want to see the documents, and then we'll go to the terminal with you and climb up the tank, go to the jetties, go and really he wants to see the seals, the pumping, etc. So it's not only paperwork. So again, and then in the end, then that's when the real work starts. You know, it's not the figure, it's what you do at the end. What we have said is that if you score 3 or less, you have to immediately within that year do something with this issue. What we do is we're not yet at the point that every terminal shares its individual points, but what we as association do is we have those informations, we have the information, and what we do is bring individual terminals together. So if you see a terminal scoring low on maybe the loading of rail cargo wagons, and we have one scoring good, we bring them together. If we see a terminal scoring bad on birds, on piping, we bring them together with a terminal who does better, etc. Management of change, etc. That's one-on-one. So that's VOTOP members, terminals helping each other, because in the end, again, it's not about competing on safety. It's competing on business, but we think we can share information on safety aspects as well. When it comes to issues we see being a problem for every single terminal, we as association come up with means to help them. First year, for example, we saw that I told you about all the laws, regulations we had to put in this big box. It was a pile when it only came to safety, environmental regulations, etc. And we saw that terminals had quite a hard time keeping up with all the changes in regulations they had, the regional regulations, the national, international, European regulations, and constantly we were talking about ADR, ADN this morning very shortly. Now, this changes every 2 years. So we saw that they were struggling. They were keeping up, but when it came to what do you do with the changes in this specific piece of law, ADM for example, what do you have to do with it? They were having a hard time. So we said we are making a web-based tool, which is not only telling them when things are changing, but also telling them what they have to actually do within their terminal to be compliant to that change. So that was the thing we did first year. Last year, for example, we saw that they were struggling with dealing with their constructor, the contractors. Terminals are very lean businesses. It's not process industry. Some terminals are being driven by 20, 30 people, but 60 extra could be on the terminal, repairing, doing maintenance, expanding, etc. So we were having, we saw that they were having issues getting the same, talking about the same things when it came to safety. So we said we have to get these parties together. So we had a very broad program last year on exchanging ideas about improving safety, getting definitions on the right track. Even this had legal implications because of course it's also a employer-employee, so to say. So they work for us. So it was hard, and to acknowledge that even, for example, standards needed to be changed, and standards for buying or buying contractors. No, that's not the right word. Buying, contracting is them. So we even saw that we needed a different approach towards commercial aspects with them. So we help them with that as well. So it's not only helping terminals helping one another, but also the association helping the whole industry. So this is the thing I was telling you about. So Susanna always just said it's not about ranking. It's about sharing information, about being willing to share, to be transparent, and not to see an incident or an accident as something as a weakness. And that's something we now have come to. We share almost everything. I would like to see that they're even sharing more, but it's a long way we came from. But I think we have done very well, and it's good to see that at least in the Netherlands, other industries, the chemical industry, for example, now adopted the same tool as we have, although for now in a light version. But they are seeing the extra of the safety maturity tool we developed. More wish list, maybe? Now, I said ask for the knowledge the industry has. I was telling you earlier. That's something else. Now we would like to see that inspectory bodies started valuing or use this tool better. We think this is a good thing. We think it's even smarter than some audits we get from governmental bodies. So we would like to now see that. I'm sorry for people who might feel offended, but we now think it's time to talk to government bodies and try to see if some of the audits they do could be replaced, or they could use at least the audit we have for their own interest as well. We ask terminals to share this information they have, their scores, with the inspectory body. So every inspectory body in the Netherlands coming to one of our members can ask for the information from the audit, and they are obliged to share the information. Obliged, they have to share this information. What did I have more? Oh yeah, I have a question for you. We are now making a protocol. What if a terminal is not scoring the way we want to have him score? What do we do? Do we start helping him? For how long do we help him? Do we kick him out? What do you have to score? We have now two tastes, so to say. Some say if you score 3 or less and you keep scoring 3s, you have to get out. And we have another school which says you have to keep doing your best as not competitor on safety, but as another terminal willing to see that there is a good and adult association or industry, that you keep helping a terminal maybe lacking a bit. So I would be interested on hearing ideas about the carrot and the stick, maybe, of the audience. I think this is it. And of course, this was safety, but we have security aspects in there, but all security aspects that are being dealt with in, for example, the ADN or ISPS, etc. So we have some elements in there, but still we have a lot to do when it comes to security, and I think it's even getting complicated, more complicated. I was just talking to another professor earlier, and what we saw the last year was companies using our websites as companies to so to say, create an identity to get investments from banks and investors. So they used our websites photographs, texts. They used our business logos. They used even brochures with other names on it to have serious talks to banks to get money from them. So another aspect we weren't aware of 2 years ago would ever exist. Not maybe very security, but related anyway. So, okay, thank you for your time. I hope, although it was a bit the odd one out, it was still interesting. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your sharing this experience and this information about the content of the tool and how it is used and how it is useful also for your members. Our last speaker for the session before having some discussion is Paul Logan, and he will speak about socioeconomic impacts and commercial benefits as a driver for progress. So thank you. The floor is yours for 20 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, it's me again. Right, okay, I'm going to talk about quite a different topic, something we've been working on in the UK for the last few years. How do we work better with our industry colleagues to get them to understand the business benefits of safety? It's in no one's interest to have accidents. It's not in the country's interest. It's not in the workforce's interest. It's not in the interest of the economy, and it's certainly not in the interest of the business. So how do we get past this stage and move on and work collaboratively together as regulators, working with industry, but also maintain that balance of having our regulatory role and actually using our enforcement powers when we need to. Okay, the basics. What do we want to achieve? Well, we want to protect the environment and we want to protect people on site, and we want to protect anyone who could be affected by work activities. We want to influence the risk creators. As regulators, we regulate. You regulate from a distance, you regulate when you do inspections, audits, but 365 days a year, the business runs that business. It's responsible for safety on site, they create the risk, they're responsible for managing that risk. How can we influence them to improve? We want to enable safe operations. We want to see countries being profitable, the economy benefiting from safely run business complexes. We want to promote continuous improvement, a requirement of SURVESO, but also as regulators, we want to hold people to account. When things go wrong, we want to hold them to account. And if we succeed in doing all these things, we believe it will reduce the socioeconomic impacts of work-related injury, ill health, and the environmental impacts, and we will support productivity, innovation, and economic growth. Sounds very simple, doesn't it? So from a business perspective, it goes without saying, if you've got a safe site, a reliable site, and a productive site, it's much more likely to be profitable. Not necessarily, but it's more likely to be profitable. From a regulator's point of view, those who create the risk, as I say, are responsible for managing them, and they must do so. But it's not. And I think this is the key point, really, that we're more and more discussing with our businesses. Effective risk management is not just a product of safety processes. It emerges from effective operations management. Get the process safety on site right, the management of your processes, and safety should follow. Our role is to create an effective regulatory framework, produce the guidance, produce the help that we can to industry to do this, supporting industry to maintain and improve, but also we have our role as inspectors, we have a role in investigating and assessing. And I'll come on to a few of the ones that we've investigated recently and how we do hold companies to account. We've set up in the UK a few years ago an organisation called the CoU Strategic Forum. And it's got an independent chair who used to come from, it was in fact the chair of Shell UK, the CEO of Shell UK in a previous, he's retired. He chairs that forum. We have trade associations representing all the main bodies, and we have the regulators. And we come together, and we've moved away from It started out as a forum where industry could come and complain about regulators, and regulators could complain about industry, and we all went away and we didn't get very far. And we sat down about 18 months, 2 years ago, and we thought, well, actually, this isn't particularly a very clever way of working. We need to actually work, what is the common problem we're trying to solve, and how are we best solving it? And that's what we're trying to do through this group. Just looking at the carrot, we've already heard a reference to a carrot just before, and the positive business case for safety. Well, if you get it right, you know, the board will have a good understanding of the risk capability and that is being properly managed on that site. It gives the company a reputational advantage, you know, and there's a big impact on societal consent. And this is becoming an increasing issue in areas of the south of England, for example, which is becoming more and more crowded, and people becoming quite affluent and moving into areas quite close to a refinery, quite close to tank storage sites, and they begin to question the right of those businesses to exist, the right of those businesses to pose a danger to them. And I think if you can show that you're running your site effectively, safely, environmentally clean, then you're much more likely to get the societal consent and less of an issue. Reduce lost time, obviously, on those sites without accidents. Increase production. Engage staff, very important to have good engaged staff who feel protected and valued. They're much more likely to be profitable, they're more likely to stay in your company than they are if it's not very safe. And it should, in the end, provide a competitive advantage to your company. Obviously, the negative case, the big stick. Potential for catastrophic serious accidents, causing injury, harm, and those can have absolutely devastating consequences on firms. And we've seen that and most of the people here who've been involved in businesses investigate, whether from an investigation point of view, whether there's fatalities, whether you're talking to the family of the deceased, as we have to. It's a harrowing experience, and it really brings home the importance of process safety. This isn't a game, it's not a joke, it's in everybody's interest to get this right. And obviously the environmental harm, we've talked earlier about some of the environmental damage that's been done by some of these big industrial accidents. It will obviously bring the regulators in on you, and you will have big investigations, extreme costs. In the UK, we recover our costs for investigations, and some of our big investigations recently in some of the big companies have cost the companies millions of pounds just for the investigation, irrespective of the fine and the retribution that comes at the end of that. Reputational risk to the company, significant economic loss, and obviously there's the direct loss, the property that's damaged in it, but there's also the business interruption, usually far outweighing the cost of the actual damage on site, usually 2 or 3 times, maybe more, in terms of actually lost revenue. Significant economic loss, as I say, isn't just about, it's about cleanup, it's about civil claims, everything. Loss of earnings, which has an impact on the local economy, has an impact on house pricing. I was reading a CSB report recently about one of the an explosion in the States, a no injuries explosion in one of the refineries, and I think the nearby town there, they'd seen something like a $1.75 billion reduction in house prices in the area as a consequence of the publicity and the impact it had, and people saying, well, actually, I don't want to go and live in that town. So they have far-reaching economic consequences, and actually getting businesses to understand these fully and to understand the consequences, and often take the simple messages home and actually work on them and make them actually work across their sites, have lots and lots of business benefits. And obviously the effect on staff morale when you have these accidents. And if we look at Buncefield, which was the last big one we had in the UK, tank failing, there were no fatalities. There was a lot of local damage to business and property. Fortunate, it was at night time, 3 or 4 in the morning on a Sunday. Most of the businesses, small industry that have been allowed. Good land use planning around there, actually, very important aspect of it. So there wasn't a lot of residential property within very close range, and most of the businesses were fairly light industry. But they were severely damaged in that. There were no fatalities, as I say, but there was very serious environmental harm to air quality right across Europe, in fact, and serious effects which are still ongoing on groundwater in the area, and a disruption in business continuity, business supply, etc. And wider industry impact. And that's quite an important point. That last point there, the wider industry impact, has had an impact across tanks and right across Europe, really, in terms of actual how people are being expected to contain them and the standards that people are actually being asked to use. Once you get these incidents, when people look at them, it often elevates the regulatory controls that are put onto them. And that has a knock-on effect, not just on the company that happens, it has a knock-on effect right across the industry in the UK. And I'm certainly aware of some other countries in Europe that have adopted the same standards since. And actually, being very, very reductive, it wasn't just about small failures. If you read the investigation reports into this, it was about the lack of leadership, lack of everything else. But in fact, you could argue the final control came down to a £4.50 padlock that was missing. And that thing, people knew about it, but there wasn't a mechanism within the company for someone to get the money to pay for a new padlock. They could pay for new pipelines to be installed, they could pay for everything else, but they didn't have a mechanism. And as a consequence of not having that mechanism, nobody bothered to replace that when it went missing during a routine. And had that been there, that £4.50, it would have saved that incident from happening as the final control on that. And it's, the cost of far in excess of £1 billion when you add in all these other things I've referred to. Another incident here, which is again a Total gas facility, not covered by CoMA, covered by the offshore legislation, but the Elgin gas field, which was one of Total's. There were no injuries. Fortunately, 238 people managed to be evacuated in a cloud of gas coming off there. Fortunately, there were no ignition sources, but it took 51 days to bring that under control and kill the well. I mean, the direct cost in lost production was about £1.4 billion, and it's about £250 million in actually dealing with it. And it was a very simple lack of maintenance that did it, and it was stuff that the company should have been controlled. It's not an easy environment to work in the North Sea, and pipes are on the bottom, but actually maintaining your pipes and understanding your infrastructure and understanding what needs to be done and understanding what can happen when it goes wrong is absolutely crucial to businesses. And I could have chosen hundreds of examples here, whether it's from the Gulf of Mexico, where simple things going wrong. BP nearly went under as a company. A company the size of BP, it's cost them 70, 80 billion pounds probably, and still going up as a consequence of very simple failings. And obviously, they have a big impact on the wider economy. And in fact, this one here had knocked 2.2% of the UK's GDP and contributed to the UK sliding into recession that quarter. So actually quite a big impact, because that then has economic impacts on the ratings the banks put on countries for borrowing money, etc., etc. So the economic impacts are absolutely massive. And I think sometimes they get lost when people are sitting in their own little business and thinking about their own issue in very short-termism. The Texas oil refinery, well, we've all heard about this, and that was a seminal moment in process safety right across the world, really. And the cost ran into many, many billions of pounds. But I mean, I've stuck this slide up from some of our data from the UK on near misses, really. And these are dangerous occurrences that are notified to the regulators. For the last 5 years data, I think I've got here. And a lot of these things, the interesting thing about them, fairly, total averaging somewhere in the region of around 50 a year. Of these ones that get notified. And the thresholds are very high. These aren't as dangerous occurrences. They're defined in our legislation as to what we expect people to report. They're things which lead to the plant being shut down for at least a day, for 24 hours. They're things like explosion, fire, vessel failure, release of flammable gases. And I think that I'm pointing to the release of flammable gases. Quite often when you investigate those, you're simply an ignition source away from taking that plant out. So although we don't see things like Buncefield very often, we don't see things like the Texas oil refinery very often, we see a lot of precursor events that could very easily lead to those sort of incidents. And I'm sure the UK is not unique in this. I'm sure it's the same if I was to ask people right across, regulators right across Europe. So quite often the good safety record that we talk about for a lot of these industries is only good by a lot of chance. There are a lot of controls. You could argue that those gas releases, well, actually the control mechanisms work. The fact that there aren't ignition sources there, but, you know, quite often that's a very difficult thing to control. And what you really don't want to be doing is relying on that final control. And indeed, we prosecuted again Total, and I'll mention them right at the end, actually, in a different context. We prosecuted Total just last week in the UK on Friday over a gas release at one of their sites, a dangerous occurrence that we investigated, and we felt that the company was seriously at fault in terms of how they'd managed that, and we prosecuted them. They were fined £400,000 in the courts on Friday. But just coming back to the Texas one, really, you know, that company was focusing on the wrong things, and it's been well published. You know, I mean, it's very good that companies focus on occupational health and safety. And, you know, my answer to that one, as a regulator, my answer is going and talking to companies when they tell me all about their occupational health and safety and how wonderful it is. I say, well, that's fantastic. You're a massive company, a very rich company. And the last thing, you know, we would always expect you as a company of that size and magnitude to look after your workforce, to actually have decent standards so that people aren't being exposed to unnecessary hazards to their personal health. That's the basics that you should be doing, really. You've got a very good safety office. You should be able to do that. But realistically, we want you to focus on your process safety risks, because those are the things that are going to actually destroy your business if you get it wrong. We take the personal safety as red on site, but we want you to control those risks. For the reason, you know, I showed you some of the dangerous occurrences. These shouldn't be happening. And getting to the point where we can stop those. And I think working with our CoMA Strategic Forum, that's one of the things that we're trying to do. How can we actually stop those dangerous occurrences and actually allow the businesses? Because, as I say, they have a very disruptive impact on companies when we come in and investigate. I just put this up, and there's a publication, I don't know whether people are aware of it, which is published by an organization called Marsh, which looks at the 100 largest accidents in the petrochemical industry, and they publish these every few years. But this is something that caught my eye in the last publication, and this is talking about the number of accidents and effects of the oil price. And I don't know if this works, but you know, these lines here are when the oil price has gone down. So low oil prices, lack of investment at those points, etc. Is that lack of investment? This is a very simplistic chart. Whether it's accurate, I don't know. I've simply put it up there. But, you know, this is sort of indicating that following low oil prices, you see spikes in industrial accidents on oil refineries, tank storage sites, on oil and gas extraction facilities, etc. I don't know how well the data has been challenged, but it seems to be true right across all sectors. Each of these different colors represents a different sector: refineries, petrochemical, gas processing, terminal distribution, and upstream. So it does seem quite a good picture. But anyone who hasn't read this, I'll show you a reference to Marsh in a minute to that document. It's available on the web, worth reading. Indeed, that's the one there. But you know, what do we need to do about this? Well, actually, my firm belief, you know, Susanna was talking about some of the information IChemE publishes. There is information, we've heard reference to lots of information being published. I don't believe we need more information. I think there's so much information about process safety, about risk management out there. I think what we need to do is get people to actually fully make sure they read it, understand it. you know, maybe the one thing we need to do maybe is simplify some of it into some very clear, simple messages that we need to get out there. But I think it requires regulators and industry to have a more grown-up relationship. We're trying to do that in the UK. I don't think we've got there yet, to have a more grown-up relationship where you can actually discuss. As Per was saying, you know, that we have a lot to learn. We're only there 1 day a year or something, 2 days a year on a site. They run it 365 days. It's their job to manage it and to understand it. And we need to actually harness that and work better with them. So, I mean, we talk about not wanting to publish. We did publish through the CoMA Strategic Forum. We published this document here, Managing Risk that can destroy your business. And it's a guide to process safety, a very short, simple one, published on our web pages jointly with the trade associations, with industry and with the regulators. And I think it's, you know, my personal view is it's a good book. But it makes the point in there in the introduction that Ken Rivers wrote, which is, well, actually, if you're the owner, if you're the board of a business, you wouldn't leave the financial management of your company. You wouldn't just take the word of your accountant that everything's going fine in terms of financial management. So why, as a board, would you take the word of the engineers on site? You need this critical unease. You need to make sure that you're questioning. And when things are going well, that's the time when you really need to be concerned because, you know, are you getting the right information? And interestingly, John Manzoni, who was the director or who was running the Texas oil refinery, is actually now got a new job. He's head of the civil service in the UK, so he's directly my boss. Well, not directly, but he is effectively my boss. And I was fortunate enough to have a conversation with him recently and said, oh, you don't mind if I ask you a little bit about your previous life in running the Texas oil refinery, really, which he went a bit red and agreed to have a conversation. But one of the things he said in that really was, and you could say he would say that, wouldn't he? But he said that the information flow was dreadful. They were getting lots of positive information from their managers, you know, about safety on site, but they weren't actually getting the sort of information they needed as a board to really understand the process safety risks. So, you know, when I talked about this one here, I mean, just reading those sentences which were picked out of the official report really was all the telltale signs were there for that business, that things were going seriously wrong on those sites. But they continued to cut investment, they continued to cut safety standards and training of staff. They continued to reduce, and that was just an accident waiting to happen. So his argument about that, whether I would agree with it or not, that information flow, he was saying that was the biggest problem that they had. And I think that is one thing that we're focusing on this over the next coming years in the UK a lot more. Our regulations and we're producing new guidance next year for our inspectors on inspecting leadership standards on sites and what we should be looking for. And then we're launching the following year. We're telling all the businesses this year, this is what we're going to do. We're preparing this guidance this year for our inspectors. And next year we will be inspecting you and holding you to account if we think there are failings in your leadership and on safety management on your site. So hopefully that will be constructive dialogue and constructive discussion, but we will be inspecting and we will be regulating and enforcing as appropriate. And I think the final remark, I've mentioned Total a couple of times, but they have got a new CEO who came in about 15 months ago, and I met him up in Shetland at the gas plant, which they've just opened up there. And I think one of the things that he said in that, there was a lot of talk, and most of it was about process safety and operational excellence. And I think this is just a sentence, something he said that just caught my attention, really. And he has come in and he recognizes there's been a lot of failings in their safety management of some of their assets in Europe over the last period. And I think he's been brought in to actually try and change that. And he said, you know, basically I focus on safety because safety is the basis of operational excellence. And I think that's something that we really want to get across to all our sites and get them to understand it and to actually put it into practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul, for sharing your thought and also this analysis of several accidents and showing that, in fact, it's better to invest in prevention than pay the bill for after an accident. And I think it was also interesting to see the figure and that in difficult period, economical period, this has an impact on safety. With the presentation of Per, we have seen that industry was joining force to develop a tool to elevate the level of performance inside the industry sector. I think this cooperation is quite interesting. And also you were mentioning that you would like to promote this, the result of these tools to show to the authority the performance. So I would like to challenge a little bit about that later on, because what I heard so far is that industries that do not like to show too much indicator to the authority because of the benchmark that can happen and asking for more or pointing out what are the deficiencies, or so I come to that later. And we have seen also another example of cooperation through the Institute of Chemical Engineer Safety Center, where company working with academics, they present or develop some guidance documents. They share good practice and that they share with the rest of the world, let's say, to elevate the level of safety. So I think we have different perspectives which are very interesting in terms of cooperation between industry to contribute to share good practice and elevate the level of performance. Are there any questions about any of the presentation coming from the floor? So Valerio Cozzani from University of Bologna.
Yeah, a question to Dr. Logan. At a certain point of your presentation, you mentioned there is a lot of information around on process safety. But what about innovation? Because do you think there is a role to play for research, perhaps introducing lower technology that has a lower cost and giving opportunities to companies to obtain the same results with a lower investment? Do we need this type of innovation in process safety?
So you have a microphone on the table.
Well, I suppose the obvious answer is yes. You know, if you can innovate to make sites safer, then quite clearly that's what people need to do. And there is a lot of innovation. There's a lot of investment going on in a lot of the oil refineries now. The oil, again, just talking about the oil price, now the oil price has gone back up. We're seeing a lot of investment going into our oil refineries, and obviously they're trying to use the best techniques and the best technologies on that. But I'm sure if people want to invest, it's difficult. I mean, we don't do that type of research, and we don't, you know, we have done on some of the offshore stuff, looking at innovative approaches to materials in offshore, you know, in extreme conditions of the North Sea, where there's a lot of, you know, obviously chlorine attack through salty water and just weather conditions. So there is a lot of innovation in some of the new oil rigs that are going into the North Sea, and I think some of that will feed through to the refineries as well.
Does it answer your question? Yeah. Any other question coming from the audience? Yes, Maureen?
I guess I have kind of two related questions. One is, do you think the business case is working? I mean, I really believe in it, but I still wonder how much traction it's getting. It was very heartening to see those words from Total. It sounded like he does believe it, but I really wonder about it across especially the multinationals who have a real complexity. And the other question is related to the metrics, because what I see is with metrics, it's just thank you, was pointed out by Paul, Dr. Logan, was that they were getting metrics at the board, but they were all good. And there's this dynamic is once you have metrics, it's great to have metrics, but how do you keep them dynamic? How do they stop being the marketing campaign? Because it should be okay some years to have a 3.5 instead of a 4.5. And that seems so hard for industry to adopt. So somehow there has to be a more heartfelt adoption of these measures as serious because the business case is serious. And that's a connection I'd like to see. And that's what my inspectors, our inspectors struggle with is they say, thank you, but did you really do this for me or did you do it for your board so that it would look like you ran your site well? And they're very skeptical. So I don't know who can answer that, but I think all of you could take a step.
Any comments? Yes.
Okay, I'll start. Yeah, I think the message is getting there. I was down at the ExxonMobil refinery just before Christmas and talking. ExxonMobil, who have had an interesting, let's be diplomatic, safety record over the last 10 years. They've had a number of well-publicized incidents, particularly in America. And I think they've got to a point where the company is saying, we do need to change, and they have just launched a new global initiative on process safety, which is aimed at doing precisely this, really, and they've made it mandatory training for all their refineries around the world. We will see how that operates, but I think they have got to the point. The CSB have been in and investigated a number of their incidents recently, and there's common causes. I think this is a depressing thing about some of these incidents is if you actually analyze them really, there are a very small number of common causes for these accidents, and you can track them, most of them back to poor leadership on the site, really. And I think that's which is why we're beginning to focus more on that leadership side. I think the business case to businesses is clear, that the economic benefits of it. I think we've just investigated, where there was an accident on a site, and I think there was nobody injured in that site, but we wouldn't give them the green light to restart on that site until we're absolutely convinced. And I think, the economic cost of a fine in the court is actually very, very small compared with the actual economic losses in production. And I think it is, once people start to realize that that's what hurts you, if you close it down an oil refinery, you can be talking about 10 million a day in terms of lost revenue. And I think, that is a huge amount. And if we keep them shut for 3 months as a result of an incident and say, well, you're not opening until we're absolutely satisfied that that is working properly, then the board soon takes notice and starts to do it. But we're trying to say, well, don't wait till that point. Let's get to understanding these risks and controlling these risks before you get to that point.
Okay, so I would like also to take the opportunity of this meeting where we are speaking about security research to ask each of the panelists if you have already some topics related to threat, either cybersecurity or physical threat that are in your focus at the moment or under discussion with your member or within your organization. So to have an overview of what the situation is regarding this new type of initiating event that can trigger some disaster, as we have illustrated this morning with the presentations that we had. So maybe I can start with you, Susanne.
What happened?
It works.
Okay.
It works.
As I mentioned in my presentation, although the iChemy Safety Center is not focusing on security, but last week I participated in the HazardX conference in the UK in Runcorn, and actually the majority of the conference focused on security and cyber security. And it was really interesting to see that all these technical experts were gathering together to tackle the issue, because they already shown many case studies, how they try to protect the network within the facility, how they highlighted the issue of remote access to the site network, or just the webmail system. So it is an emerging interest even from process safety experts to tackle these issues about security. And I think it's going more and more important, because it was basically more than 50% of the whole conference was on this topic.
Which is new, because which is new, interesting. Per? Is it a topic of discussion within your association?
It has gotten a topic of discussion during the last year due to different incidents, or although very small, people trying to get into terminals with false IDs, people trying to get into systems related to energy support. So we were looking into what would happen if electricity would fail, for example. And we even had one terminal with a guy with a truck showing up with false papers, trying to get a load of something. So it's all kinds of aspects we see more and more these days. And as I said, not really a security risk for us, but related to was the example I gave earlier about fraud, more financial fraud, but still related to websites, to computers, etc. And they even call us to get information about the businesses.
So you said the word incident. Does it mean that there was no major consequences?
No,
and it was handled at the level of the company without any, let's say, information reported also to the inspectorate?
It was people trying to get in but not getting in, because there was a good check on ideas about loading people's double checks, etc. So we report these to the competent authorities we have for these matters.
Okay, and are you thinking about solution to improve this kind of intrusion or this kind of cyber attacks as well? Are you collectively thinking?
We started to. We had one of the members here, one of the professors at our association last year to give a presentation, and he did a check as well at our terminals. But we are starting, to be honest. We had a lot of work on our safety maturity tool, on our safety matters, and we see now that we are on the right time, having time to deal with the new aspects of security threats. Yeah.
Okay. And from your side, as an authority, have you more incidents being reported, or are you taking some specific measures?
As Per said, we're aware of people probing systems and checking and trying to get into systems. We're also aware that one company within the UK contracted external people to challenge their cyber security. We know it took them about less than a day to get in and take control of most of the site as part of that, and they had control over whether they could switch valves on and off, they could switch equipment on and off, and that was very easy. That was just through sending emails to the site claiming to be a local new dentist who was offering cheap treatments and things, and they just relied on one person opening the flyer that was attached, and that gave them complete control of the site. And they did that. They took this piece of work on, and they did it within 8 hours. They were able to take control of the site. And when you hear that sort of information, and and we don't know the company that was involved in that, but that is simply the Siemens, the company, feeding back what they did. And, you know, it sort of, you can't help but sit up and worry when you hear that type of information. We've produced guidance for our inspectors. As I say, we will be inspecting against this. I think we, at the conference at HazardX last week, one of my staff was giving the keynotes, talking about our approach to cyber on this and how we will be inspecting. And we're working very closely. I mean, we're not, you know, we're working with the companies. The companies that we're piloting this on have volunteered to take part in this. And, you know, obviously in a non-regulatory way. So if we find things, we're not going to be taking issue with it. We're going to be helping them to put it right. But from next year, we will be inspecting properly against those.
Okay. Are there other competent authority in the room also having in focus this kind of threat and which have decided to have some specific inspection on this aspect? No? So, Alexandros, you wanted to?
Yeah, if there's nobody who wanted to answer that question, I would actually also have a question to Per. I mean, thank you for explaining the safety management, sort of safety maturity tool. And as you said, you're not yet focusing on security, but I was wondering, now that you have seen how you can improve safety through this sort of monitoring, indicating, benchmarking, would you feel more comfortable now, okay, that you say maybe with a similar system you can also address security increase or change in security management in the sector? It's a hypothetical question, but whether that is also has probably some cross-fertilization to your future work on security.
What I didn't tell is that maturity also is about the tool itself. It's not only about the users of the tool, but the tool is evolving every year. So it's getting more complicated, more elaborate. So I can imagine that more and more of security aspects would come into play. But we have seen changes in this, and sometimes that was frustrated for the members, because that would be of immediately effect on their scores. but with a good explanation, that was okay. And in the end, it's not about scores again. It's about the learning and exchanging of information.
Okay. Are there any questions on any subject? No? Yes? The microphone is arriving.
One of the things I can add is, and we've talked about transport earlier.
And you are from FECC, eh?
Doug Leach, yeah, FECC, also from the UK. We have a system which is run by Department for Transport, and what they actually do is they will do challenge inspections. And so they will talk to somebody in the company and say, right, I'm coming, I'm just going to walk on site, and I'm going to see what I can get. And there has been situations where Department for Transport has been able to walk. I'm not saying these are Seveso sites, but they've been able to walk onto a site with a yellow jacket on and say, I'm here to see John. And there seems to be lots of Johns or Daves in the UK. And they can just wander around the site. So then they then go around to reception, take their yellow jacket off, put their official badge on, and have a quiet word with them. So it's up to various different authorities how they handle it, but the UK is very much hands-on. And we probably wouldn't report to Paul, because this is health and safety stuff. We would report directly to the police, or we'd ring the counter-terrorism security office. If there was somebody doing something around our sites looking a bit dodgy, then we would actually phone the police, because they would be there quicker and take them off. And we've had one site where that happened. Somebody came on taking photographs of road tankers and whatever. It turns out the road barrels are worth a lot more on the scrap market than they are on the road. So he was trying to find out how much he could get for each of the barrels. But they spotted him, and then they set the police on him, and the police chased him down the road, caught him, and arrested him. So it does happen, but you often don't hear about it.
Yeah, so depending on where you report. Yeah, I think it's an interesting remark to get access to this information, which is at the interface, in fact. If there are no other questions from the floor, I have a question regarding the Sendai frameworks that we have mentioned today, and which is a framework for action, asking country to develop some action plans to tackle natural disaster, but with after Hugo, Sendai is focusing also on man-made disaster. Is this something which is also driving some of your research or some of your activity to the compliance with the Sendai framework? Is it a topic in IKIMI, Safety Center?
Maybe not directly, but we cannot avoid these situations and past accidents that are related to the Sendai framework. And if you just think about Fukushima, you can easily link what were the failures, and then you learn from that experience, and we try to embed it into our work and guidance documents, but not necessarily directly tackling the Sendai framework, but around it, yes.
Okay, so contribution indirectly to the objective of Sendai. No other comments? Okay, I think the first session was in the afternoon was a little bit tiring, but I think we have time for coffee now, to have a coffee break and to re-energize ourselves and continue with the last session in about a quarter of an hour. Thank you very much for your attendance. Thank you to the speakers.
Hello? Yes, now, here. Okay, welcome back for the afternoon for this last session of the day. Now, we started off today, this morning, with a focus on research. Thereafter, we looked specifically at policy. Just now, session 3 was on industry, and now we're going to bring it all together. So session 4 is called Focus on Practitioners, and the objective is to put things into practice and look specifically at lessons learning, at the return of experiences from actual events and incidents. So how this then feeds into policy making, industry actions, actions by other actors. Here on the panel, we have a mix for this last session of a policymaker from Poland, Paweł Dadasiewicz. We have an industry representative from the Republic of Moldova, Svetlana Sturbu, representing Danube Logistics, and we have Maureen Wood from the Joint Research Center. And I'd like to invite the panelists to speak in the following, starting with Maureen, who will present more generally the approach to lessons learning of the JRC and the bulletins that are being regularly produced. Thereafter, it will be the turn for Svetlana, and then we'll hear from Paweł about lessons learning in reality and an accident report before leading into the discussion. With Maureen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, it's working. Thanks. So now this is, I think, slightly different, going from the general to the more specific, on a specific aspect of how one of the mechanisms we use to prevent and prepare for accidents, and that's not my presentation. Would you rather switch? Yeah.
Sorry. My apologies. So we'll change the order. We'll start with Paweł, and then we move into the lessons learning bulletin and the JRC thereafter.
Maybe I will just hold it. So good afternoon, everybody. As you already heard, my name is Paweł Dadasiewicz, and I am representing competent authority for the implementation of the Seveso directive, European directive, and as well the Convention on Transboundary Effect of Industrial Accident. And I will try to briefly tell you first about my organization itself, but also the main issue, the main point of my presentation, the aim, is to tell you about an example of an accident that took place a couple of months ago, and it's still investigation ongoing. Just wanted to briefly tell you about my organization. This is Inspection for Environmental Protection. This is a two-level organization. There's a central body, Chief Inspectorate, that I represent, and there are 16 voivodeship inspectorates, regional inspectorates in the country. And of course, we have our inspection sections, environmental monitoring sections, and laboratories. Regarding the tasks, generally speaking, because we have a lot of them and more every year are put on our shoulders, some of them, the main and most important, let's say, is the controlling compliance with the environmental. Oh, sorry, this is what I can see and you cannot. So this was not my intention, but still I will have to be aware of of that. So this is the structure under the Ministry of Environment, Chief Inspectorate for Environmental Protection, and the 16 regional inspectorates within the country. So regarding the main tasks, as I mentioned already, it's controlling the compliance with the environmental protection regulations. This is the main task, and then we have also the examination of the state of environment under the program of the National Environmental Monitoring. One of the main tasks is also prevention of major accidents, as you can already know. Also, we do also with the shipment of wastes. In my division, also I deal also with the PRTR protocol, pollution transfer and release protocol, probably you have heard about, and some of the new tasks that were put on my division is also access, benefits, and sharing. It's under Nagoya Protocol implementation in the UE, and it's under the Convention on the Biodiversity. But this is not that I want to share with you, and I don't want to complain about this. Regarding the preventing major accidents, here you can see on the slide just the most important, and let's say, generally speaking, the tasks that are here. So this is, first of all, we inspect the operators whose activity may cause the major accidents. And we report, we maybe keep a register of this sites like this, and are not only Seveso sites, lower tier and upper tier in terms of Seveso free directive, but we also register the sites that can cause a major accident due to the dangerous substances stored on site. And actually, roughly speaking, we have around 400 Seveso sites and around 815 or 20 other sites that also are capable to cause a major accident. We also do some, maybe researches could be understood in a different way that I would like to be, is that we do analyze the causes on the effects of major accident on environment and ways of their elimination. We have the legal instruments for that. And as I also already mentioned, we keep the register of the sites, and we also register major accidents. Just some statistics, but very short, and just to give you the idea of what are already expressed regarding the number of sites. We have 3 types of sites, Seveso sites, and the other that we have around more than 800 sites. And regarding the sources of major accidents, so it's generally we have 2 groups that the major accident that took place, and near misses as well, because it's not only major accidents fulfilling the criteria of Annex 1 to the Seveso directive, but also other accidents that are involving dangerous substances and are posing hazards to the people and to the environment. And the other is transportation. We also keep the register of this kind of accidents. And the last is the other. So these are the accidents not classified within the that did not occur in establishment transport. But for example, it could be because one of the examples that I can give you here for other is, for example, dangerous waste that were left somewhere in the forest and also pose some hazard to the environment. So. That's it about my organization. But now I would like to go to and tell you about an explosion in a chemical plant that took place a couple of actually months ago. So it's still. Please have in mind that it's not like full investigation has been carried out, but still I can give you some information regarding the accident itself, and this is what I would like to share with you. So the accident, this explosion, happened in the Seveso site chemical plant. It's an upper tier establishment in terms of Seveso free classification. It happened in the blending unit where mixing of explosives took place. And substance involved was explosive substances, as you can see here, but it was not the quantity is not is unknown. And it happened, which is quite important to stress here, that it happened during the maintenance works performed by contractors. It has been mentioned today that this is still a problem. This is something that because it's not the first accident involving contractors in Poland. And we feel and to see that it's good that either Seveso free directive put some more pressure, more regulation on that. It's more specified there. And I'm also happy and thank you to MAP work that they already issued a bulletin for that, and this is also something interesting to share for the operators and the inspectors as well. Regarding the circumstances of the accidents, so the explosion occurred during building works inside the blending unit. So as you can see here, before the works, the unit was shut down from exploitation, so no production took place, no storage or transport of dangerous substances took place on site. The concrete floor was washed with, as a preparation phase before the mating works, it was washed with a solution of NaOH, sodium hydroxides. Thank you. Regarding the consequences, unfortunately, one fatality and 2 injured people. Damages to the site on site were not very huge. As you can see, it was initially established as €300, but still we have human loss within this accident, and some basic results of the investigation. So the unit prepared for maintenance works according. It was prepared according to the internal procedures, so it is something to be stressed here that this kind of operation were happening before, and it was not something completely new. So there were procedures in place, however, not sufficient enough, as you can see here. The applied method for nitroesters neutralization, which is hydrolysis, with a 10% of sodium hydroxide appeared to be insufficient when liquid explosive is present in narrow apertures, chinks, due to small surface and lack of mixing possibilities. Nobody's telling me that I'm saying something, and please be... I'm sorry for that, but so this is what I just said. Maybe it was not that clear. Maybe I was too fast. So just you can have a look again, and I'm sorry for that again. Within the results of investigation itself, so of course the nitroesters in this concrete floor were not expected, their presence was not expected, but this building works involved electric hammer use, so it was assumed that heat of an electric hammer into nitroesters resulted in this explosion. And most likely the source of nitroesters in the concrete floor were, as you can see here on the screen, which is accumulation of nitroesters coming from dynamite leftovers formed during multiple cleaning of blender, possible leakages from the pipeline shedding the sewage waste containing nitroesters. And there are lessons to be learned, measures taken in order to prevent recurrence. They are just, as I said, preliminary, because as you already saw, there was human loss. When it comes to the human injuries or fatalities, as in this case, there is our labor inspectorate involved, and it also carries out its investigation. Due to the fatality, there was also a prosecutor. There's also a prosecutor involved and is carrying out the investigation. So we, as a authority for environmental protection, we're gathering the information from the operators. We are in touch with the labor authorities, cooperate with them to gather this information so that we can provide it later on to the IMARS database, because this is an accident, reportable accident to the IMARS. And as you can see, some of the lessons learned for today. a thorough check of all the areas in which the following operations take place, like production, processing, and storage of explosives, focusing on the places where the substances may accumulate, including sewage system, ventilation ducts, verification of the documentation, the procedures, including adequacy of methods used for cleaning the equipment and facilities, introducing these documents procedures for unusual situation, because it was not the case, and of course training of the staff, training. I would repeat it because actually it's always the case when an accident takes place that it seems that people are not aware of the risk they are dealing with. There has, because this is regarding the measures taken in order to prevent occurrence, this is all for the moment. I believe there will be more in-depth analysis. It is ongoing still, so we'll have more to share. Just wanted to tell you that the competent authorities issued a decision posing to the operators the obligation to also to analyze the Seveso documentation, generally speaking, including the safety reports, if the hazards, if the situation like this are covered by the procedures included there, shortly speaking, this is what I wanted to tell you about. If you have any questions, bursting questions now, or maybe after, it depends on Francisca. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Pavel, for having told us about the specific accident and the lessons that you have drawn from it, the results of the investigation, also the interinstitutional cooperation in this regard, and also the decisions by the authorities for the operators to review whether the processes are adequately implemented as a result. We'll move to questions and answers at the end after the following presentations. You mentioned, Pavel, that this accident was an accident that was also reported to the EMARS database, and this is now a natural link to the next presentation by Maureen, head of the Major Accident Hazard Bureau, which maintains this database and analyzes also the accidents report in that database. And Maureen will tell us about the lessons learned bulletins, and specifically the one on emergency response.
Yep.
Maureen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Francisca. Okay, so this is I think, a very big topic, and I'm only going to talk about a very small piece, but maybe it will stimulate some thinking and some questions. I want to start with just why are lessons learned important? What are lessons learned from chemical accidents? And then go towards lessons learned process and some of its challenges. So fairly simple structure. So let's look at lessons learned. Now you can just imagine, what is a lessons learned? You can imagine this is a great thing for task groups and university professors to look at, and of course they have looked at this, because what do we mean by learning? There were 3 definitions I found, because actually I've never tried to define learning. I don't know if that's a bad or good thing. I assumed I knew what it was, and maybe I don't. But this is what some people say. I'm going to read them, even if you can read them. Learning is acquiring new or modifying existing knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, or preferences, and may involve synthesizing different types of information. I think that's quite an advanced level of learning, in fact. A learning organization actively creates, this is about a learning organization, creates, captures, transfers, and mobilizes knowledge to enable it to adapt to a changing environment. And look at these definitions. They're very old, but we're still talking about how do we learn and how can we learn better. But they're very old, 30 years, and probably you could find definitions maybe from 30 years before, because I think this is not a new issue. And then more recently, when learning from incidents, the organization uses the information from incidents to change, to actively improve, and to prevent future incidents. And here's interesting thing about the last two definitions is they're actually talking about what the organization does, that learning is an active process. In a way, what I'm going to talk about the whole thing, but the piece that we do at the Major Accident Hazards Bureau is only the middle piece. There is a piece before, which is gathering the information about the accident or the incident. There is then the analysis, which is what we do. That's analysis of lessons learned. And then there's the learning. And all these pieces, actually, I think we're still having a tough time mastering. We may always, actually. Always, it's a dynamic process, and it's challenging. One of the questions I had earlier was about systematic nature, and that was a really good question, because we like things to be systematic, because we know that means that hopefully they're more complete. In my opinion, the investigation to some extent should be systematic, to a large extent should be systematic. I only said to some extent because the investigation itself will be systematic but focused probably on what the investigation wants to find out. You can have an investigation on why did the pipe break? And all you'll find out there is why the pipe broke. But you may miss other questions, but that may be what we need to know. It's not, you don't necessarily have to be critical about that. But another investigation may be, why did they use this process when they knew the pipe was weak and could break? And then that's a different investigation. So how the investigation process is conducted and what information is uncovered is very important for the lessons learned, because if you didn't investigate certain aspects, you won't get it. So the first part is very important. Then what you do with the information is also important. And I find that both in government and industry, we both need lessons learned to do our jobs. The oversight enforcement of government requires lessons learned, but of course the industry operators need lessons learned. There's a big struggle with that, I think, still going on. And I think in many ways, and I see this in our inspectorates, for example, not all of them. As we saw, we witnessed a case where this wasn't the case. But many of them, either they haven't had enough accidents or incidents that they know what to do to take a look at that incident and get learnings from it, or, and this is something that does worry me, this is not part of their regular job. They don't get trained on how to look at an accident. And so when they get a report from a company, they say, I guess it's okay. And they don't challenge it, even if they may not be sure, because they don't have enough confidence. My inspectors don't have enough confidence to challenge it and say, you need more. And on the industry side, I think it's difficult sometimes to investigate yourself. I don't know, and so I think that's a challenge. At the same time, it's also not part of the business process in many companies, and so they may not train, and I've heard this from some of the partners that we have working with us actually on a particular project, that they have the same challenge. It's a one-off. They don't have to learn, don't have to know this to do their daily job, and they don't learn. So we have a problem with the process. And then the learning part is also something that probably in many organizations we find is still also not incorporated into the business process. In many it is. Let's remember we have got lots of sites that have made this part of their processes, but we still have to worry about the ones that haven't. So a little bit about learning. So I talked about sort of objectives of learning, and we have one way I like looking at it is the single loop learning and the double loop learning. At MOB, we don't go to the site. So I think single loop learning is, of course, valuable. You want to know why the pipe broke. See here, the example is what? Section of the pipe breaks from corrosion. Material composition of the pipe was found below the recommended standard. Well, that's already good information that you can act upon. But what we generally look for in MOB is something more than that, because that's only going to help the site, and the site needs to know more as well. And we look more at the double loop. All pipes seem critical to safety are checked and upgraded as necessary, and the organization modifies its inventory management practices and documentation. And we do still see lots of incidents where this hasn't happened, even though it seems clear it hasn't happened. So we want to take note of this and remind our sites that they're critical safety elements. They need to know what standard have been applied in selecting them, and if they're up to the standard that the process requires. Some of you might remember a 2012 accident that the U.S. Chemical Safety Board investigated in Chevron, and this is exactly this problem. The piece of pipe that broke, it was behind the process equipment. They couldn't see it. It was an old process from pre-1986 when the standards for that kind of process were established. I think it might have been a distillation unit, if I remember, and that's a high heat process, requires very strong metal. And they thought that it had been replaced when other parts next to it had been replaced. It hadn't, and it broke. They didn't know what the standard was, and they didn't find out, and that was something that cost them a lot of money and a lot of regulatory attention. So I said I like double loop learning, but when I thought about it, this is my own schema, I actually like triple loop learning. Maybe someone will take this up, or maybe someone already has done this, it may not be new, but what I actually look at it as 3 areas. One is the technical learnings, and that's what we called the single loop in the previous slide. The next is sort of the site safety management system. It's the procedures, it's the policies, it's how they do things on that site. And then I look, and I think more and more we're moving to the organizational framework, and that's going to be bigger than the site. That's going to be, it feeds into the safety management system, but that's the environment, that's the culture, that's how you are working with the corporate in many ways, what corporate is enabling you to do and what they're not enabling you to do. Our colleague, Peter Logan, brought up the Buncefield accident. There's many other accidents like this, and the BP ones, but these were very much signal accidents about failures of corporate management to have a good two-way communication with the sites. And sometimes their practices were not enabling the site to manage their safety properly. So we need to look at those, and that's what we try to do. In many cases, we don't have enough information to give you the exact technical reasoning. We don't know what kind of corrosion it was. Our reports don't say it was high sulfur corrosion, or whether it was oxidation, or so we don't provide those. We look more at the 2nd and 3rd levels when we do our analyses. So why are they important? I think you know, but I'd like to just say a few things. They are our early warning systems. I think you all agree with that. Many are not perfectly designed. And this is my message that I wanted to say earlier about the IT people who think that, electrical engineers who think automation is the answer. Their systems will not be perfectly designed either. And change, and this is something that I think Olivia talked about a lot. We have a dynamic economic system that works, that pushes technology, that pushes decisions based on prices, and that can radically change your processes. So you have to keep on top of it by continuing to see what you can be learning, especially before a major accident happens. I think you all know that, but you might like the messages to use yourself. This is an example of what we produce. We try to produce, as Zsuzsanna said about iChemie, but before that she worked on this, but I think we're both, iChemie and MAB are moving the same way. Short and shorter. And actually, I would have to credit also our technical working group on inspections for this. I think they were the first ones who said, we don't need big documents. We don't have time to read them. We need to give quick we need to give briefer guides on more focused topics that when they're going to work on that one topic, they know that's where to go, and they don't have to look through 250 pages. And so we have 6 to 8 page briefs on one topic as reference guidances. They usually are 4 to 6 accidents that have on a theme. And we've done these themes. We've done 12 so far. And the one I'm going to talk about now, really quickly, is our lessons learned from emergency response failures and successes, which is the last of an emergency response series that we did. Mainly prepared, the analysis was mainly prepared by Zuzana, but since she left me, I had to do the last one, so I know this one the best, but it was all on her work, and so I want to talk about it. And this was about a fire at a chemical production plant. It's actually in the UK in 1992, but I think still quite relevant, as most of these are. There was an explosion in a storeroom in the raw materials warehouse. There was an incompatible chemicals issue, so eventually the incompatible chemical that wasn't supposed to be there, which was this ammonium persulfite, ignited. The AZDN wasn't supposed to be there, and the ammonium persulfite, which was the oxidizing substance, unfortunately ignited. The fire spread to the remainder of the warehouse and to an external chemical drum storage. And the crucial error leading to the fire was, of course, the incompatibility issue. But what was interesting was that how they managed this, and this is actually, to me, a failure that led, a potentially failed response that was successfully handled. So I thought it was kind of interesting. One of the challenges they had was with firefighting. They knew already they did not have water, adequate water for a certain scenario, but they hadn't managed to address the issue. And unfortunately, the scenario happened. But the firefighters had been well trained. So we've got sort of a layer of protection. One thing didn't work, but another thing did. They knew that the critical issue was not to make that fire spread to other parts of the site where there were more flammable substance stored. And so they used what they could, which was basically foam, to keep the fire from spreading. And they managed. Another thing that happened was it was fairly close to a residential area, and they weren't sure about what was coming out of the site and whether it was toxic, and even if there was going to be some thermal effects, so they had to notify the population. They actually delayed somewhat in turning on the system, but the firefighters, who had been well trained, said, turn it on. So we have to thank a lot the firefighters here. And then about after an hour, or maybe half an hour, I guess, a short period of time, it went off because the fire caused a power cut. But because they'd been coordinating with the external responder community, which included the police said, right, we know what to do. We'll go around and we'll tell all the people what they should do. So they did. The people evacuated, and they ended up also not having anyone hurt in this exercise. And the only one that got hurt really was the poor old river, because unfortunately they hadn't foreseen that contingency, and that may be something they addressed in the next scenario. And the reason I like the scenarios is that it's not about a perfect emergency response. It's about being able to make decisions quickly and communicate. And that's what they did. They should have addressed the water system. They should have figured out maybe that the sirens could be caught by this accident. Well, they didn't, but they had a backup. And in many sites, in many accidents that we studied for this analysis, it didn't end up as well. But it's important to know how important the training and the communication is, because they can save lives. When the technical stuff that we rely on, the fancy IT systems, etc., may fail, people still can do the job themselves. And so that was kind of how we came up with this. And it could be considered more of a safety management system level lessons learned, because we had no information on the organizational, and that's generally where we point our lessons learned. Opportunities for double loop learning. Yes, this was all what I think I already just said. One of the other things, just pointing out from the lessons learned from this also, because we found this with other accidents, is that make sure your emergency equipment is what you need and what you want at the time. I'm not just talking about this water situation, but there were other situations where they thought they had something and they didn't have enough. There's a lot of responses that went badly wrong because they didn't really make sure that the equipment was there. And the technology testing and backup systems, which is associated with the siren issue, but happens with other technology-based systems. You have to be very careful with those, that if you haven't tested it, it may not work. I thought I'd end with this, but you don't have to answer this because it would take us a long time, but I wondered if you remembered some of the lessons learned from these famous ones. I don't have complete lists because they would be very long for a few of them, but I thought, look at all we've learned. Some of these have changed our philosophy of running things, have changed regulations, have changed our techniques. I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but if there's any need to remind some of our stakeholders and constituents why we do this, these are really good reasons.
Thank you very much, Maureen, for this presentation, taking a broader picture at lessons learning and highlighting both some of the challenges and the opportunities. Now, in terms of challenges, I mean, Maureen mentioned investigations, but also linking the different components, the technical learning, the site management systems, and linking that with the organizational framework, moving from single loop learning to double loop learning, and that's where also then the opportunity lies. Thank you, Maureen, for having highlighted also the specific example from one of your last bulletins on emergency response, where the river was the one to suffer, and this leads us into our next presentation, actually the last one of the day, after we had a look with these two presentations on lessons learned from accidents. Now Svetlana will highlight specifically lessons learned from an exercise in the Danube Delta, an exercise conducted in the framework of the UNECE and its assistance program to prevent and minimize the potential effects of accidental water pollution of the Danube Delta and the Danube River. Svetlana, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'll stay like this to not have experience of the Pavel. Sorry. So I'm Svetlana Shtirbo. I'm from Republic of Moldova. I was working for many years for the environmental authority, and just 1 year I'm working like a health safety and environmental protection officer in the company of Danube Logistic, where we had the project for the more than 4 years. So, why this project started? In fact, it was based on the analysis of the Republic of Moldova, Ukraine, and Romania, that we need to start cooperation because the oil terminal that Moldova has is on the 5 kilometers from the oil terminal from Romania, Galați oil terminal, and also about 5 kilometers from the Ukrainian, also big terminal from Reni and Izmail, so they have two. And we wanted to cooperate together. That was not the case before. And also it was insufficient cooperation also between the operators and the national authorities. This is also what we wanted to improve. As an example, I can say that several years ago, the company even didn't allow the authorities to come on site and to have any kind of, let's say, exercises or work together. In this project, we could obtain that the company became open and they want now to cooperate with all the authorities because they understood the authority, in fact, is not the something that you have to be scared, but it's something that you have to learn from each other, and that's what we wanted to achieve. As mentioned, Francisca, this project was carried out from the UNIC Industrial Convention, and we took part in the assistance program, for what we are really appreciate this very much, because indeed Moldova is a developing country, Ukraine as well, let's say, that we only had Romania as EU neighbor, so that we could learn together from each other. This project was a very complex one, so it took about 4 years. It took longer than we planned just because of some political reasons, but also what we wanted to achieve is that our scope was to improve cooperation between all 3 countries and also between authorities. And this was also important thing was this top table exercise that we had during these years, and also field exercise. I forgot to mention here that we had also during this project some joint visits of the inspectors in the places. So the 3 countries inspectors, like about 45, 50 inspectors from each country, visited oil terminal in Moldova, and also we visited that oil terminal in Galați in Romania. And this was a point that we learned, that they have to work together. It's like when inspectors came and we simulate such inspections for each side from different countries. This also gave a feeling that operators said, but you have to check here, you didn't check there. So these important things, what learned also authorities, that they have to look in details, that only operators knows where is the problem. And they were focusing probably for something that was not really very important for the moment. Let's say they were, of course, they are looking for the documents and everything, but the problem was totally in different place where only operator knows this. And this was also a point that to learn from this joint visit. Also, the joint training for the table exercise and the field exercise were for testing some procedure that were in place for the notification, communication, also preparedness and response. As well, we tested a request for the mutual assistance, how it works, and we identify also some points, how can be moved from one country, or how can come from other country mutual assistance if we don't have in place in the legislation or in something these kind of things, or it's prohibited probably to come with such kind of equipment. Or so it was so many details discussed in this project. Of course, we worked on the joint contingency plan, and it's also many interesting things that were taken into account, and still it's needed to work, because this is a live document that we always have to improve, because, for example, in Moldova, already in 1 year we had 2 governments. All the time is changed contact points, all the time is changed people. So this is also a point that have to be taken into account. So the field and tabletop exercises were evaluated. What it's good that we needed to identify gaps, to develop ways to eliminate them, and what is good that we developed also a report of this evaluation. And important thing was to not be afraid of imperfections, because if the exercise is 100% perfect, so then it doesn't feel something good. What we played too much, or so it's success when you fail, exercise fails, because then you learn from this, then you have gaps from this, then you understood why it failed. And if exercise, of course, was too easy, so that in that case it was also some people and resources wasted, so it has to be based on some very good scenario. One important thing is that we don't have to hide things, so we have to be open. And the same for authorities, the same it was for the operator. And to create a false feeling, like I said, for the safety is not the best ideal situation. So this is also that openness in this case for the safety, it's real play a big role. One thing that was also good to notice, it was to maintain a huge risk for compliance. This was a point that we should take into place. Operators normally, they act or they do things based on their knowledge that there cannot be anything. So it was a risk for them as well to understand that always the thoughts that it cannot be happened, it doesn't work like this. So this is a critical root cause for accidents and related wrong approaches. So this evaluation report after the field exercise that we had and top table exercise, it's for us, it's real like a book now, what we have to do next. This I put some focus of our evaluation, but I'll skip because we need to. So overall observation is that we need realistic scenario and an open atmosphere. And these lessons are identified indeed for opportunities for improvement and development of the company. We were based on the notification communication. Just very short on this, I will not go through all of them, but I put them in this presentation just for people who are interested to know exactly our problems and gaps that we identified. Here, one example. It was during our exercise, it was a train that passing the accident place. That was not at all planned by anyone, and it was just a case that we were amazing that only 2 minutes, if it will be yearly, we could not send the emergency car to save people's. We could not, because we should wait. The train should pass about 5-10 minutes. So this case we didn't take at all into account. And the transport authority was not informing about our exercise because we didn't even think that we have to include them in this list. So this was also a thing that was shown up exactly in the exercise. Okay, we had many other things that we checked, and we have all the recommendations and also gaps that we described, and it was many of them. For what I'm really happy that we could identify, probably they could be more, but in that time we are happy for this exercise, that we could see how it works in fact, all the even equipment that we have, that it was not really enough even saving gears for the people there. It was not good, booms that they were flowing all the time because of the flux of the water. So they cannot protect even the river in case of a big, let's say, spill of oil. It was many things, and they are very good for us, so that especially for the company that we identify them. And it was also for the authorities, some things to learn, not only for the company. Authorities didn't communicate with each other very well. And for example, the monitoring of the department from the Chisinau had to come to Giurgiuleș. This is 250 kilometers, because the inspectorate that also can come from CoU, that it's 50 kilometers only. So they didn't agree on this or such. So this is some things that also was very important. Communication between the authorities is really, let's say, what I can underline in this area. Well, from the recommendations, I make 3 slides of recommendations. They are based on the gaps that we identified. I will just go through very superficial on them, just to create awareness at the top management of industrial operators and the authorities about the importance of preparedness and response to accidents. This I also want to refer about now my experience from the company, that authorities are also requesting from the authority a lot of documents, papers, and everything has to be prepared, not mostly for the preparedness, but mostly for the case of accident happen. And because authority is also doing things what authority is requesting, because they also don't have enough or time or staff or something else. So then they start to elaborate, to make priority of what it's asking from us. If it's asked this, so then we are focused on this. This is not the right approach, of course. But it's also, it was reviewed the decision-making structure at the national, regional, and the local level, as well the roles and responsibility for the key players, because we could also identify that several companies or authorities are responsible for checking, for inspection, but no one is responsible for other things. That it also was important. So it's important to analyze the capacity, equipment, and expertise that it's needed to operate adequately in various types and scenarios of accidents. So this is also important that operators have to take into account the most possible scenarios that they can develop for each of the place of the work and the risks and everything. With more, they do it, then of course they test it, they train it, and then they can see their problems and gaps to evaluate them and to eliminate them. To test and to train the communications between 3 countries regarding the response to an accident. This also was an experience that in Romania came with very good proposals and very good equipment, and they were prepared for helping us. And the same as well, it was participation from the Ukraine, that of course not such, let's say, fully, but at least in the end of the project, we got to know each other better. And it's good always to know your neighbors. So it's good to develop a training program for the response services. This is what I'm really busy now in the company, that we are developing a lot of documents, programs, and trainings, and for staff and for everything. And it's good, of course, to integrate such program as well in exercise and training for the neighboring countries. My one advice is to train, and to train. What my company or Danube Logistic learned from this exercise, they understood that in fact they don't have all the safety things in place. And they didn't have the health safety environmental officer full-time appointed, so they had some services, but it was not. And of course, when we came in the end of the project with a list of the gaps that we identified, they said, who has to do it if only you can? And they asked me to change, to come to their company and to implement everything what I put in the paper that they have to do. And I think this was a good, not really perfect idea for them, because I'm such a person who goes so much in details. And this year, they spent so much money that in 10 years they didn't for the safety in the company. Of course, it's not easy, of course, to always to prove and to say that it's needed this, it's needed that, because only I came and I started exactly with the needs. And we make this plan that step by step to cover all the gaps and to do the best. And I'm really very proud that in Moldova there is this company that they want to do it, because this company is a private company, but they want to work with the authorities. They want to come, and they come with some proposal, questions, something that please help us to do this or that. For example, to manage, it's not the topic, but just for example, to manage the waste we cannot manage the waste in the company because Moldova doesn't have companies who can take from us the waste from this oil. So this is a lot of things that are not, and our company is like pioneer in everything because it's only one oil terminal in such area, like with huge amount of the chemicals. We don't have any other terminals, storage tanks or something. And everything what is made in this area, and this is also border, we have only 600 meters of the border. So our company is located in very narrow place. And this is used for, economically this helps the country a lot, but this is also, we request now from the country a lot of things that we want to manage because we want to be a very good company that, and also for Seveso. No one in Moldova still, of course we are not still obliged, but we have to start to implement and to think about Seveso directive. And I'm telling to all my colleagues, even from the ministry and everywhere, that we are proud to be a first company in Moldova who wants to say that we are a company from Seveso. Because they're all afraid to be a company of Seveso because they have to implement safety reports, because they have to do this, and they don't know how. And this is such a problem for operators as well, because they don't know how to do it. And we are such a kind of pioneer in everything, and we want to work on this and on that, just because we want to be safe. And from all these things, we are learning a lot of things. And in the end, what I want to say that really, I'm very thankful that I was invited to this meeting or let's say workshop, because this is a kind of bridge between, of course, safety and security, but it's also a bridge because the authorities and the operator. And responsibility of any accident is on the operator side. And if government is changed all the time, every year, every month, you never will get responsible person there for anything. Always it will be operator. So today was mentioned that indeed, do you organize something for the companies, for the operators, because they are people who has to know all these interesting researching materials, all the developing guidelines, because they have to use it, because they are interested in the safety of their company. So thank you very much for invitation, for very good seminar, because the topics were really very good pointed and scheduled. So this is, Alexander, your good knowledge how to keep balance between the speakers. And welcome for the questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Svetlana, for telling us about the lessons learned from the work carried out under the Danube Delta project involving joint inspections, tabletop exercise, field exercise, and also the drafting of a first version of a joint contingency plan. And you highlighted, vividly the different challenges also involved in transboundary cooperation, but in cooperation not only between the three countries in this case, but also between the authority and the operator in that instance, and how distilling these lessons learned, you are now working to actually implement them and assuring us that lessons learning shouldn't stop there, but then one should actually move to the implementation phase, and surely there can be more lessons drawn from that. Now we've heard now about Svetlana's example, lessons learning from exercises. Before that we heard about lessons learned from accidents, incidents. There can also be lessons learned from near misses. Now with this I'd like to first of all open the floor for any questions you may have to the speakers. Now, if there are no immediate question, maybe a question for food for thought. We heard some examples on harvesting lessons learned. How do you harvest lessons learned from incidents, near misses, from exercises? How do you make sure that they are captured, that they are spread within your organizations? And how do you move from single loop learning to double loop learning, which Maureen showed to us? are there any examples that you wish to share with us? Yes, please.
Thank you. Actually, I will not answer to that question. I just would like to make a small remark. You refer to the Seveso directive and the need for companies for having safety reports and implement measures that are in the Seveso directive, although you are not obliged, like you said, exactly. But I'd just like to invite you to look also at again, the CBRN Center of Excellence. It's something that we mentioned this morning, and especially Olivier Salvi. We, within the Project 41, are somehow exporting the Seveso directive and all these measures into West Africa. It's also done in other projects in Eastern Africa. But the CBRN Center of Excellence is an international initiative funded by DG DevCo and with support with other DGs, and implementing bodies like the GRC also highly involved in this. And I would like to invite you to look at those projects. There are other projects that mirror Project 41 and 42 that could be of interest to you and other companies. So in both ways, you could look at DG DevCo, who has as a financial instrument the ICSP, which is the instrument contributing to stability and peace. And it does not only cover CBRN aspects, but the European Commission and GRC also now moving into the safety industrial risks direction. And I'm pretty sure that you will find a lot of, let's say, trainings, workshops, seminars that are relevant for economic operators, should they want to understand and put in place safety reports and follow the Seveso directive.
Okay, thank you very much for telling us about the Center of Excellence initiative, and I mean very much in the framework of the context of the conference on linkage, safety and security linkages, but also the EU and non-EU linkages. I mean, we've heard a very concrete example at the EU, non-EU border, but highlighting also the EU, CBRNE, and Centers of Excellence as a platform for sharing and spreading experiences and legislative approaches to other regions. There's, with Josephine Tort, also from
okay,
the
thank you.
Just
thank you for in fact making it very easy for me now to jump in. One of the ways we will, just a practical way, that one project has just finished on chemical and biological waste management in the African Atlantic Facade, Project 35. And so when we are now about to get the national experts in the Eastern and Central Africa region to help create and fill out the bones or the skeleton of a new project on chemical waste management, we will invite the people from the African Atlantic Facade to talk to us, to tell us about the good things and the bad things from the execution of Project 35, so which was chemical and bio. One of the lessons we learned was not to mix the two in a project. So we've already stripped it down to chemical waste management for the Eastern and Central African region. So yeah, it's I think we are obliged to try to make sure that projects are successful by learning from the lessons the mistakes we've made, basically. Yeah. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Another really small remark, again, because you referred to waste, and like my colleague said, Project 35 was dealing with hazardous biological and chemical waste. And there were other projects dealing with hazardous waste. I know that there is a call for proposal, and there'll be a new project, like you mentioned, into your region that will cover those aspects when it comes to hazardous waste. And it's also important to mention that these projects funded by the Centers of Excellence are, of course, dedicated to reviewing the legislation, providing training, helping governments and helping the industry. But in addition to that, there are also equipments that are acquired by the governments through the Instrument for Stability and the ICSP. So it's not only, let's say, training and legislation supporting governments industry, but it's also very concrete, and there are, you could also look at how to benefit from these tenders to get equipment, to treat on-site, in situ, the waste that you mentioned.
Thank you for these specifications. I think this discussion is leading us to, an interesting dimension in terms of cross-border lessons learned, but also lessons learned across the different policy areas. From safety to security, and the lessons learned in the industrial safety area, the community, the momentum, the approach, also the work done in particular by the JRC through the Lessons Learned Bulletin is very much developed. And I think another question could also be, how can now this knowledge inspire, other areas under CBRNE, critical infrastructure protection, and really inspire the security debate, as we've been discussing during the entire day, but that, So any further reflections you may have from the floor, but also the panelists in that regard?
But before I give the floor to I take the opportunity of having the control over the mic. I think whilst we're talking about cross-fertilization of all these sectors, I think we should also not be sitting too high on our level. Maybe there's actually also something that we can learn from the African countries or from the Eastern countries. Maybe they find approaches which, in the EU we tend to be very technocratic, very complicated, very sophisticated, but maybe there are ways to do things easier. Just a bit of a food for thought.
Thank you. First of all, I'll take the opportunity of having control of the mic to say thank you to everyone who's presented today. I think there's been some really interesting presentations. It's given me a lot of food for thought. Maureen, I particularly like the bit you were talking about of single and double loop learning and then into triple loop. And I was noticing some of the lessons learned from the list of safety incidents you talked about, and wondered if you thought of any ways that we could translate some of that into a form of lessons learned for security to bring us back to bridging the gap. Fortunately, we don't have quite as many incidents to draw lessons from, but is there anything in the safety incidents we've had we could translate into security, do you think?
Yeah, I was thinking, is it? Oh, yeah. I was thinking that, too. In the interest of time, I was really afraid of going on too long, so I didn't tie up some things, but that was one of them. Is I think actually there's directly lessons learned from most of the emergency response. And the issue is how do you get them, I think, to the audience? And that would be really interesting to do and not very hard. So I take that as a challenge and an idea. And maybe, though, we would make it cross. We did something, you made a very good segue into something I wanted also to mention, was we just had a joint, we just contributed to a publication of OECD Nuclear Energy Agency on emergency response. And that was the point also, was essentially, and this is also going to be a problem with security, they don't have enough accidents, thank heavens, to get enough emergency response lessons learned. And so the idea was, well, let's take it from other places. This is a common topic for many kinds of disasters, and technological especially have emergency response issues in common. So they published a public, I call it a joint, but we had 2 chapters on NATEC accidents and on chemical accidents, and we used a lot of the work we did for the Lessons Learned Bulletin, but it was a different angle. And then they also added their accidents, and I encourage you to go to the OECD NEA, Nuclear Energy Agency website for that publication. And we're going to have a follow-up seminar next year, which you will all hear about. So, and I think that's a model that maybe we should follow, and maybe we need to look for that in security. But I think also it goes beyond emergency response. And while we haven't looked at some of the accidents that way, as you saw from my second presentation, I think you could look at almost every one of those accidents and say,
well, how could that have happened if someone wanted to do that? And I think you could find ways to create possible scenarios.
Thank you. I wanted to make two remarks about on this session. The first one is about lesson learned, so learning from experience. And I think it's very important when we collect information about accident, incident, that we have some narrative, detailed information, because this is in the details, this is in the sequence of the accident, which is described, that we learn what went wrong, that we can, if you read something which has happened somewhere else, you can project yourself and see what you could have done better or what you could implement to avoid this kind of incident. So the database with statistics are interesting for policymakers to have a global picture, to see some trends. But I think the narrative database are very much more interesting. The second remark on this issue is that usually people who are concerned, they do not look at accident database so regularly. So operators, they are not looking at the accident database every time they make a risk analysis or there is a change in their operation. So we need to continue to raise awareness on the accident database and give incentive to operators, to safety officers to regularly look at the accident database. And that's the reason why I think that the most useful accident database should be those handled by industry association or sector within an industry association, so that there is a sort of proximity of learning from experience. And it's much more effective than national centralized database where information is collected by public authority. So I think this is more effective because there is a give and take process which provide more exchange of experience. But of course, then you have you may have more exchange of information, but less reporting to the authority. Another remark that I think is important, especially to raise awareness and to improve the interest in reporting and learning from experience, is to have information about the cost of accidents. Decision maker, especially in the industry, they are interested by the cost of accident. We had some discussion this afternoon on this issue. But what is important is to have a sort of shared approach to estimate the cost of accidents. I mean, usually we measure the damages, the cost of the response. This is the above part of the iceberg. But you have all this indirect cost with business disruption, loss of market share, jobs that are lost, and job depending on the factory which had the incident or accident, which are also affected. All these indirect costs are very difficult to assess, and I think we would need a sort of harmonized approach to estimate at least this kind of cost, so that we can better make decisions after that and allocate priorities in the attribution of attention by the authorities. So I think that in area where the vulnerability is more important, we should also make sure that we will make more effort to avoid a disaster and mitigate the consequence of a disaster. So these were two remarks that I wanted to make.
So if there is nobody, so I will just make a comment because I would like to reflect on what just has been said regarding this making aware of accidents. I would like to support this. I can just give you an example that even we had last year, 2 months ago actually, when an operator was elaborated the safety report. You know, he updated it. He gave it to the authorities for approval. And our inspector saw that NATEC events were not let's say, described or given in a good way, representative, let's say, manner. He gave a negative opinion to that a report, so the operator appealed to the second level, which is then our organization, and we actually gave also the negative opinion. And the case was, I'm telling you about this, that operator raised an issue that he checked in the EMERS database. There was no NATEC even in the LPG site like this, so it was not. There was no other source where he could find anything like this. But unfortunately, to the operator, in our internal database, it happened that it was not a reportable accident, NATEC even. It was quite small because it was as far as I remember, 1 cubic meter of LPG that emitted during it was connected with the low temperatures. However, with let's say it was not some kind of an incentive for him. It was not approved. The safety reports was not approved. And one more thing that I would like to say, that it's good, of course, to such an opportunity like this to share the lessons learned, because the operator actually, when we were trying to look in our database where this accident took place, it happened that it took place in the same operator but in a different region, different site, however the same operator. So it was another thing quite interesting here, but still the history is tend to be forgotten somehow. So and I think also, as you just said, that operators do not look very often to there. It's maybe from time to time, depending on the staff, the possibilities from them on how to manage the things. But this is the issue. So I'm also happy that this kind of opportunities are us here. And one more thing that I would like to say regarding this dissemination, what we do in Poland. So we try to meet on a regular basis with the inspectors, where we share interesting lessons learned from the accident that took place. If, for example, if there are another forums like SEG meeting tomorrow, sometimes Alexandros allows me to make a presentation on an accident, but the agenda is always very tight, and there is no time for that. But still, he does allow me to say a couple of words here, and this is why I also came here to share it with you. Okay, so this is it. Thank you.
Thank you. And another intervention from Daniel Bonomi from Switzerland.
Yes, thank you very much. I want to thank especially Svetlana for his presentation, and also for being there. And your story is very fascinating. Also that you changed from government to private. And I don't know whether it's good for Moldavia or bad, but for the company it's very good. And I have some experience, I had one experience in Tanzania, and so my question to you is, what makes industry going further than what authority is asking for? Or in another sense, when the authorities do not have the competence to make a good inspection, to make a good regulation, what are incentives for industry to go further than what the authority is asking for?
Yeah, interesting question, but I think the most important thing is safety. To be safety, that means that you have to comply with all kinds of things and what you want to do. And of course, in my company, it's a bit different situation like for others, because, for example, we want to comply with the European legislation. We want to go through even Moldova doesn't have all laws in set, and we don't need to comply for all. But of course, we are doing like a double job, because we want to comply for the national legislation, and we also want to be prepared for the European legislation when it will come, that we are ready for having all placed and set. And this is a bit probably now double job, but it will come to that situation that we will need to do these all things that now it's not required at the national level. And of course, it's difficult for the authorities to be, let's say, such keen prepared and everything. And I know that my colleagues from the authorities, they always are trying to do the best, and especially when it's such kind of projects like GRC proposed for Seveso, and we with Romanian colleagues are very well working in this area for learning from them, because they already had this procedure in place, so they know exactly where are mistakes. We should not step on the same, let's say, wrong tip. So they are teaching us exactly what is needed, and here our teachers, Francisque and Magda is not here, but we are really very appreciate this, and I know that my colleagues are they are happy with these trainings that we have. I wanted just to mention that the follow-up for this project that we had, we really want to work further on these gaps. And of course it's not easy because, let's say, there is no money for anything in the countries, but we want to get something, to achieve something. We don't want to stop only this. We want to make a sustainable, let's say, safety for the industry and also for the authority that they know how has to be. And we applied, after this project was finished, we applied for the Danube Delta Project 2 in the European Union for the funds. And it was so interesting situation that the project was selected. So let's say we won it, but we cannot apply it. This is again the problem at the national level, that country like Moldova, like Ukraine, we are not able to let's say, to work on the procedure that the European Union made for the financial procedure, let's say like this. We are not ready for this. We cannot put our money in front and then to receive the help from European Union after. So this is somehow that our national level is not prepared for this. This is a gap. To not be able to use the money that are, let's say, focused on to build sustainability in the countries. So this is still problems for the non-EU countries. But hope everything will be fine, and for we are still not, we didn't lose our, let's say, hope to achieve some continuities of this project.
Also, I just wanted to respond also to Daniel, because we've worked in very many different countries trying to help countries establish better safety programs. All countries are different. We were lucky actually that we had neighbor countries that had actually once upon a time been one country, with Romania and Moldova, so that was a really good fit. But you can't bring every country together because some systems are very different, and often it works to find a partner. But there's many pressures, and I think that can work besides regulation. If you can't quite get the regulation in place, one is the top-down from the government. That helps a lot. But the centers of excellence, I really admire as a concept. It's something that we thought we would also begin to think about too, but perhaps in a less systematic way. But also with our work, especially with the UN Environment, we saw that regional country relationships can help because it can provide horizontal pressure. The industries also that are more multinationally associated, the more that they get involved in cross-border, they have pressures to comply. And so I think with expectations, so I think sometimes when we want countries and industries and sites to improve, we have to look at what could motivate them. And it may be, and we also, if we're trying to help them, we have to look at their situation and tell them what would motivate them. Sometimes they want to, but they feel that they will lose their competitiveness if no one else is doing it. And the secret is to find some ways to help put positive pressure on them and make it possible also for them to react. But it's not easy. It's a puzzle. It's not something. It sounds simple, but I think we all know it's not easy. We have to keep working on that.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the speakers, and thank you also for your questions and comments and remarks. Now this brings us to the end of this session, which highlighted the importance of lessons learning for adjusted policies and measures, so as to avoid future accidents, cooperation across countries, across industries, operators, across different policy areas. And I think with this we can close and further reflect on and look at how the industrial safety community can further inspire the security community in this regard.
Yes, thank you, Franziska. I'm going to apply some lessons learned now, I'm going to follow Svetlana's advice on saying train, train, train. I'll twist it a little bit and say repeat, 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 because as you may know, one of the lessons learned from educational systems is that in order to have a maximum learning experience, you have to repeat. And I want to do that in summing up the day and recapitulate a little bit. So I hope also these last 2 minutes of the day, I know everybody wants to go home, but it's for your own good. So, just a reminder, the purpose of the day was to bring everybody together, so the safety and the security community, and I think we have achieved this very well today. We've discovered a lot of commonalities between the two, a lot of mutual benefits have been raised here in the meeting today. We've also seen some possible target conflicts, public interest versus security interest, to name an example, a few gaps where probably we have some ideas for future research. Lots of good practices exist in both communities and lessons learned. There's a lot of lesson learned catalog available from the safety community that can be probably not immediately taken over, but maybe somewhat transferred. So the questions that we wanted to raise in the day was sort of what has been done already, what is missing, what are the needs. I think we have a little bit of a clearer picture. I said in the beginning that it's going to be a cruelty of the day that we will not be able to dig deep into the things, but I think we were having a first idea. And the third purpose, I think we've also achieved this a little bit, that we start thinking a little bit more holistically when we talk about security and safety in not that it always matters, but that whenever you are working as a safety officer, that you also think, okay, there may be security components and vice versa, the other way around. So a little bit more specifically, in the first session, we focused on research. We have seen ongoing research in what is going on in the area of major accident hazards, or the safety research, as we called it today, in process safety and process safety management. We've also heard what ERNSEP is doing in terms of critical infrastructure, and what we've seen is there is already the start of combining security and safety aspects. Is not yet systematically there, but I think what we've heard is that there's an increasing awareness already. So probably we have entered the valley of death already that Peter mentioned earlier today, and it's only now that we're sort of already halfway through to really get the message through to everybody that we can actually start benefiting from all this. But we also have to be aware that sometimes it may not be meaningful to sort of over-harmonize, so there is sometimes good reasons why safety and security are two different things. So we have to remain mindful of where we can have synergies and where we should not have synergies in order not to conflict each other. So in the second session was all about policies, and we've identified a few opportunities and challenges that materialize themselves when we are implementing at the same time safety and security legislation. And I think the United Kingdom has provided, Paul, I can use the name, be more personal. Paul has provided us with excellent examples on how you are trying to approach this. And we've also heard, we've also taken a look at the external dimension of these safety and security aspects. So we had some interesting presentations from Franziska and Maureen on work outside. And I think the lessons that I want to flag here are not necessarily specific to non-EU countries. I think it's maybe on a different level, but I heard the whole day through how important coordination is amongst the authorities, amongst across safety and security authorities, but also cooperation between authorities and industry. Non-government organizations haven't been mentioned, but I mean that's an all stakeholder approach, and all hazard approach is necessary. And what was also flagged, well, I think also not only in these presentations, but also throughout the day, is that that there are multiple benefits when implementing safety legislation, because it's not only contributing to the safety of establishments as such, but there's also a strengthening of civil protection. And it contributes to disaster risk reduction. The work on safety supports CBNE and critical infrastructure protection. I think we've said that now so many times I don't even need to repeat that anymore. It's already engraved in your brains by now, probably. So it's really nice to see that there were some people that clearly highlighted that it should not be separated, these two topics. And then there was a question. There was a question on how we involve industry in this whole process. As I just mentioned, cooperation. So we also need to be mindful of the authority versus industry cooperation, which has led us nicely into the third session, where we were looking a little bit into understanding better what are actually the drivers, what are the factors for improving safety. In that session, we looked a little bit specifically at safety, but I hope that it was also seen as a sort of a model for security, or that it can be immediately transferred also to the security part. So unfortunately, Jana has already left, but we learned a lot about how the ICME Safety Center is trying to put these things into practice as an industry research institution. Per from Vote from the Netherlands Tank Association has told us about his safety maturity tool and how to measure safety, and that it could also be an inspiration to see, okay, first of all, can this be applied in other industrial sectors? I mean, he gave the example that the chemical sector is already interested in this tool, but also can something similar be reused also to measure improvements made in the area of security? So that was an open question. And then Olivier just made the intervention, stressed the importance of knowing what are the actual impacts, and not only the socio-economic impacts and the commercial benefits for industry, but I mean that we need to take a holistic look at what are the impacts of accidents, and what is the and not only of accidents but also of security events. I mean, it's the same. It's actually the same thing, and that we need to look beyond the immediate cost of an accident, but what was stressed several times was the corporate image that can be lost. I like to add the word shareholder value, which was a critical issue in the BP oil platform thing, as Paul mentioned, it nearly broke down a company like BP to have a single accident. But also productivity of a company, competitive issues. These are things that nobody thinks about when we talk about impacts of accidents or impacts of incidents, but it needs to be factored in to get a clear picture, and leave alone things like staff engagement, which will in turn increase productivity of a site. And we also have seen how a single accident can impact also other companies. So the industry as a whole suffers if one company does something wrong. If it goes wrong in one company, eventually the whole industry sector suffers in all the EU countries, basically, because immediately inspectors will go around and ask questions, can this happen here, can this happen here? And so it's not only, the repercussions are not only in the company itself, but it actually spreads around. So I think these are concepts which have not yet been fully understood, everybody. And there was a question, what is motivating companies like Danube Logistics to go beyond the legislative requirements? And I think it's probably, I cannot answer that question, of course, but I think one of the components is probably that these are the companies that have understood the wider impact of accidents and incidents, and they've realized that there is a very strong business case for safety and to keep people safe. So last but not least, the wonderful panel still sitting here has been trying to explore a little bit now. Now we have all this information, and how do we actually put that into practice? How do we learn from accidents, incidents, security incidents, and exercises? What is the, let's say, the theoretical framework behind it? Single loop learning, double loop. There was somebody saying triple loop learning. So, how do we actually learn mechanically, but also stressing the importance of practicing things? I think what struck me most in this session, to be honest, I think that was again from Svetlana's presentation, when she said that one of the key things is about attitude, that authorities it's not only about imposing things, but it's also about helping companies to apply things, and vice versa, and then companies helping authorities to understand what are actually the critical aspects here in process safety. Because I mean, myself, despite my technical chemical background, I have no clue about process safety, so I would need to be told as well what is actually the factor that is critical here. Yeah, and as like Svetlana said, exercises matter. It is really critical that we do exercise, and when we do exercise, they do not only have the added benefit of being better prepared and to apply the scenarios, but there's a lot of trust building going on. Here we saw the example of transboundary trust building, but it's also, I think, in any exercise, the trust building between a company and the competent authority, or between several companies participating in the exercise, getting to know your neighbors. It's always a good thing, as we learned, not only, I mean, that's a general life lesson probably, but to get this sort of, face-to-face knowledge, or knowing people face-to-face, which always helps, and hopefully is also something that we did here today. So hopefully we build a little bit of trust between the safety and the security community. So in conclusion, and that is going to be my final final slide, I think we have made very good progress today in bringing the two communities a little bit closer together. What can we do? Some ideas for what we can do, because of course it's clear that we only scratched the surface, so there's need to continue our efforts. So one opportunity could be to have a similar setting in next year's chemical accidents theme day in the community of user, but also for you to take home, what can we do in terms of cross-pillar cooperation, we in the Commission, you in your authorities, you in your research institutes, in all sorts of levels, start thinking, start breaking down the silos. Don't be afraid of annoying your colleague, being a little bit disruptive to the comfortable and peaceful seat that everybody is sitting at the moment. Steer it up a little bit and ask a question. I think one of the key things were for future research areas and exercises were highlighted. And one of the things that I'm also going to take back home, and maybe as a food for thought for future events, is that it was said we need to learn not only across safety and security, but there's also possible other threat sectors. Well, I call them, put them a little bit in quotation marks, that we need to learn also, not that we also cross-fertilize the experience between the chemical hazards, biological hazards, nuclear hazards, so that we learn also from what has been learned from the nuclear side. But also what was mentioned today several times was the transport sector, whether there is a possible cross-fertilization. So with that, just in case of any follow-up questions, this is how you can reach me, and if you forget what I look like, there you have a picture. I think it was a super day. It was a very pleasant atmosphere, wonderful panelists, excellent moderators, and a brilliant audience. Thanks a lot. Good evening. Yep, that's it.